What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be going over how quarterbacks can build a perfect throwing motion. So we're going to be looking at three specific quarterbacks today. We're going to look at Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, and Patrick Mahomes, and we're going to talk about all the similarities they have in their motions. Now, all different styles of players, all different body types, they play the game a different way, they all have different motions, and that's honestly what I want you to understand about quarterback throwing mechanics. That there are a lot of things that we try to focus on when you're building a motion, but every single human on earth, you guys, has different genetics, a different body type, so they all do certain things differently, but the core elements of their motion that are all similar is what I want you guys to try to add to your game, right? So let's take a look at Aaron Rodgers' motion here. I think pretty much, honestly, I think I'd be willing to say this. I think this is fair. In the history of football, I don't think anybody has a smoother throwing motion than Aaron Rodgers, and nobody has better throwing mechanics in my eyes. So when it comes down to throwing mechanics, I break the mechanical motion into four specific parts, and that is going to make up something called a throwing sequence. So the first part of your throwing sequence is going to be your base. Then the second part of the throwing sequence is going to be the stride. Then it's going to be the hips, and then it's going to be ultimately the shoulders and the ball, right? So those are the four elements that make up a perfect throwing motion. So when you're in your base, the magic position that you want to be in is pretty much where Aaron Rodgers is right here. And when we look at Joe Burrow and we look at Patrick Mahomes, they all get to this position. This is essentially something I refer to as keeping your weight back or being stacked. By stacked, I mean you want your head, your knee, and your foot stacked on top of each other in something called like a skyscraper, right? Like a very, very tall building, if you will. So when your weight is back like that, the weight that's loaded onto your backside, you are able to transfer that to your front leg. But also when your weight is back on this back leg, it allows you to get to a concept called upper body and lower body dissociation, which means ultimately separation. So if you guys are trying to get at least a better throwing mechanics, better, smoother motion, more velocity on your throws, that's what you ultimately want to shoot for, but it starts with the base. Now, when you're in that base, I think of it too as well, like you want 60 to 70% of your weight onto your back leg, and you want to be nice and light on that front foot. So that's the first part. That's the perfect base. Now, when you stride, it's very important that when that front foot starts to get down, that is ultimately when you start your motion. When that front foot is making contact with the ground, you want to be in this, like I guess you could say, opposite equal or backstroke position. A lot of quarterback coaches really emphasize getting to like a perfect L with their back arm. But again, so many guys are different. Patrick Mahomes is a little bit lower. Joe Burrow is a little bit higher than this. Aaron Rodgers isn't at a perfect 90. He's got like a tighter arm. So that doesn't necessarily need to be a perfect L. You just need some type of backstroke position where your front shoulder is slightly rotating in this direction as your front foot gets down. That's dissociation. Notice how when his front foot is getting down, his back knee isn't starting to turn in. His back hip isn't starting to rotate. He is keeping his weight loaded in that stacked or skyscraper position as the front foot is getting down. You keeping your weight back will allow your shoulders to go this way and get to dissociation. Think of it like a baseball swing. Because guys, when you hit a baseball and throw a football, you generate bat speed and generate throw power the exact same way. It comes from something called torque. And torque is generated from upper body and lower body dissociation. So if somebody was throwing Aaron Rodgers a pitch right now and he was in the batter's box and he was holding a bat, he would step to the pitcher, but he wouldn't lunge forward. He wouldn't push off his back foot. He wouldn't start to rotate because that would cause the bat to come through same time as his stride, and he'd be laying down a bunt. He'd have no power on the ball. You have to separate the upper half from the lower half. So you got to be able to step to the pitcher, but still keep the bat back, still keep your weight back, and then what do? You fire the hip and the bat whips behind. Now, when throwing a football, it's the same type of concept, but instead of a bat, it's your arm holding a football. So when Aaron Rodgers goes back with his shoulders, that front foot anchors down, that is when our hips start to rotate. So to get our hips to rotate, you could think of it a couple ways. You could think you're pivoting off of your big toe. You could think you were trying to open up your front hip. But whatever you need to do to make sure that that back hip is turning through and that back hip is coming through before the elbow and before the football. This position right here where the elbow and the ball are kind of trailing behind the back hip, that's called chasing the hip. That is how you get your arm to have that whip and ultimately get us more throw power and more velocity on our throws. So that is ultimately the throwing sequence, you guys. You want to get to a base, you want to stride. When you stride, you keep your weight back, you separate your hands, you get to a backstroke, and then the hips bring that upper half through. And that right there, that throwing sequence is what all elite passers have in common. Remember, everybody throws the ball differently. Some quarterbacks are 6'5", some are 5'11", some have longer arms, some have shorter arms. So they're going to do certain things differently. I'm trying to get you guys to focus on the things that they all do the same, because when the top passers in the game are all doing something similar, that's probably something that you should add ultimately to your game. So I'm going to play this full speed, and then we'll get into a clip of Joe Burrow throwing and talk about the similarities he has with Aaron Rodgers. Now, before we get into that clip of Joe Burrow, you guys, if you are a quarterback and you guys would like a 8-week training schedule that you can follow, go to that very first link in the description below for our elite quarterback training package. What you'll get access to is 8 weeks of daily gym workouts for quarterbacks and an on-field throwing schedule for 8 weeks for quarterbacks. So essentially how it'll go, it's a schedule Monday through Sunday. We'll have it mapped out. Monday, you're doing this in the gym. We give you the exact sets and reps to do. And then on the field, you're going to be doing these types of drills, throwing these routes, give you the exact sets and reps to do, and a video example of each drill so you guys know what to do. Plus, within the 8-week schedule, we also include a 30 to 40 minute long video on how you guys can read defenses to improve the mental side of the game. So guys, if you want our elite quarterback training package, go to that very first link in the description below. That is where you can get access. Again, very first link in that description below. Let's get back to this video. So let's take a look at Joe Burrow here, right? So let's talk about it. Remember, the 4 parts of the throwing sequence are going to be what? You obviously got your base, you got your stride, you got your hips, and then you got the ball. So let's look where Joe Burrow is right here. Is he in that stack position? Foot, knee, head. His weight is shifted on his backside. I know there's that famous clip of Joe Burrow talking about how he wants to be 50-50 with his base, but right now, he's about 60 to 70% on his back leg. You see how his front foot is nice and light. His heel is off the ground. His weight is back. A good way to check if you are in that stacked position is your back shin straight up and down. A lot of QBs think they're stacked, but their knee is almost caving in and their shin caves in towards their front foot, and that dumps a lot of weight onto their front side. So being able to stay in this position right here is where you ultimately want to be. So obviously, I'm going to play it full speed, then we'll break it down. Great sequence, great take back, obviously great hips, but it starts with the base, you guys. So again, when he's in that base, pay attention to what his back leg does when that stride foot starts to get down. You see how he's still maintaining that stack position. He's still keeping that shin straight when that front foot is making contact with the ground. Now, when his front foot is making contact with the ground, what is he doing with his front shoulder? His front shoulder is starting to rotate. He's taking the football back and getting to that backstroke position. A lot of quarterback coaches teach their guys to lift directly up to 90 degrees, but when your hips fire through and you're already at that 90-degree angle, that ball tends to pull behind your head, or you have this really high release point, which actually makes your release a little bit slower in my eyes. So it's always good to get to this backstroke position. But again, it's not the same backstroke as Aaron Rodgers. And when we look at Patrick Mahomes, it's not the same backstroke as these two guys. Burrow's a little higher, Rodgers a little bit lower, and then Mahomes is a little bit lower than Rodgers and Burrow. But again, they all have that backstroke happen, and their front shoulder slightly closes, and their weight stays back when that front stride gets down. Now, front stride's down, your shoulders rotate back. Think of it like a baseball swing. What do we need to do? Front hip needs to fire through. You need to drag that back foot through and pivot off of the big toe. And you see how his hips come through, front hips opening up, elbow, football trailing behind the hip, and then he's able to rotate through and drive. So guys, again, remember, everybody throws the football a little bit differently, but we look for those key mechanical aspects that make these passers some of the best in the world. So now let's take a look at Patrick Mahomes here. Now, he's throwing a deep ball. I mean, it's a deep ball for most of us, but not really for Patrick Mahomes. I believe he's throwing this thing like 50 yards downfield, but he throws it almost on a line. Like, the guy's got insane arm strength. And again, maybe something that you guys can pick up from his mechanics that can improve your arm strength, but sometimes guys just got a little extra juice than others, and that's totally fine. But it doesn't mean that you can't play the position. Mahomes could probably throw it 20 yards further than Joe Burrow, but does that make him a better pocket passer than Joe Burrow, or does that make him have better accuracy than Joe? There's a lot more things that go into the position than that. But remember, we're focused on mechanics, right? So even on a deep ball, let's take a look at Mahomes here. Is he in that stacked position? Foot, knee, head. His weight is obviously back, and he tilts that front shoulder just a little bit so he can throw that thing with a higher trajectory. But pay attention to the base. Now, let's take a look at what's next, the stride length. I'm actually going to play this full speed, you guys. This is a little bit in slow motion anyways in the clip, but I wanted to show you guys it coming off of his hand full speed first, and then we'll talk about it. So weight is back, front foot starts to get down, And now, see, the thing about Mahomes, because it's a deeper throw, this is one thing that it's a little bit trickier for quarterbacks, is that when it's a deeper throw, it's more tempting to push off the back foot and have that knee cave this way a little bit on the back take of your ball because you're trying to drive the ball further. Now, again, just like we saw with Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers, it's easy on the short routes where you have to bullet it to try to stay back. Or I shouldn't say easy, but easier. On the deeper ones, a little bit more challenging. But he's still trying to keep his head back. He's trying to keep as much weight as he possibly can loaded onto this backside so he could have that backstroke. You see his backstroke. Obviously a little bit lower than Rodgers and Burrow, but when that front foot gets down, you see how he still is at that opposite L position or that backstroke position because now what has to happen? His hips have to rotate him through. See the back hip is coming through, elbow, football trailing behind, and then he drives. So guys, if we could try to take all of those elements, base, stride. When you stride, your weight stays loaded on your back leg, your shoulders rotate back, and you take the football back, and then the hips whip the upper half through. I am telling you, we will be a more consistent passer because this is what the top guys all do. You take the similarities from their game and can try to put it into your own game. You don't throw the ball the same way as Mahomes. You're not going to have the exact same motion as Aaron Rodgers, but little things you could pick up can make you a more efficient quarterback.